Do you want to get the most out of your Fusion titles and text-based motion graphics? In this video, I'll share 3 of my most favorite topics around the Text Plus tool. I will talk about shading layers, from basic concepts to some advanced ideas. You can use shading layers for anything from underlines, outlines, boxes, glow effects, reflections, etc. And you can separate them out and treat them individually in Fusion with additional effects. Let's look at this. I will talk a bit about fonts, like what I have installed, how you can combine them, some tricks here, and how you can combine multiple within one Text Plus element, which brings me to the last topic, which is modifiers. Specifically, I want to look deeper into the character level styling modifier, which you can also animate. There are some tricks around that. So everything centering around the Text Plus, an in-depth look. Here we go. Here you see some simple effects that are all created based on shading layers in the Text Plus node. So we can use them for lines and boxes. We can make simple effects with this. We can even build some reflections or some glowing text. Let's have a look how this works. So if you just use any simple Text Plus node, and maybe we do that glowing text as an example. If you think about layers, you would usually think about layers in the edit page. Like you might have one layer like this, and you could have a separate text here with a different color underneath, right? And depending on how you do this, you might be able to get some effect where one text appears under the other. Now, just by resizing, that doesn't work particularly well because we probably want to change individual characters. Also, this is not very useful to do it like this, because when you change one element, you have a problem, you have to change the other as well, and so on. So manual layering of effects is not particularly useful, so much better you do it in an automatic way. And this is where the shading layers here come in. So you have here different slots. Element number 1 is on by default, and then you have additional elements which all have some different defaults in there, but you can also change them. For example, layer number 2 would put the same glowing text, whatever you have written, in the text tab underneath. And if you click enable, you see the default here gives you a red outline. This is just the default because you can change everything about it, right? You can change the color. You can also make it a box, for example, right? So up here we just have a text, and we can change this or just delete it to not confuse us and write in there whatever we want later. So you see we have, for example, boxes here, and they can be around a character or around the entire text. And around the entire text is useful, for example, if you want a frame with rounded borders, for example, or if you just want a line. One way to do that is to go down here into the size and just squeeze it into a line, and then under position you can reposition it like this, for example. There are sometimes cases where I would use the text itself again as a layer. So this can be used for like shadows or these kind of funky effects that I am seeing right here. But you can also use it, for example, to build any form of type of reflections. For example, you could start to animate the offset, have like a kind of lens reflection, something like that, where the text is shifting around. If you use rotation in a clever way, you could, maybe not this one, this goes around the characters, but if I rotate around X and position this in a clever way, I might get something that looks a bit like a reflection, and I might reduce the opacity and perhaps give it a bit of softness so it's not so clean, and I might come up with something similar to what you have seen here. Now here we still have some additional animations, and I'll come to this in a bit, but before I go there, let's go back to the theme here, which was glowing text. So let me reset all of this. Let me reset the offset and this, and I will just add more softness here. And I might also add glow. And here you see how we get glowing text. let's make it yellow. So we can customize this here. We can add more elements. We can name them. In this case, I name it glow. But just with 2 elements, we can often do a lot. We can enable, disable them at our convenience and also try out different things and just enable the slots we think we need. But we can also separate and animate things, and this is where I go into Fusion, and let me show you a trick for this. This gets a little bit more advanced because you need a tiny bit of Fusion, but I think many of you will want that. So what I will do is I will take the template here, which is just the text plus node with everything that you have from the edit page. I will Control-C, copy it, and then paste an instance, Control-Shift-V. This has all the parameters linked, so if I have it side by side, I have here the template with everything and here the exact same thing with all the parameters identical. But now I can do a simple trick. I can de-instance the enabled parameter, here de-instance, once on layer 2 and once on layer 1, de-instance. And now I can disable something. So for this one here, which will be the glow, let's call this glow. For the glow, I disable the enabled one on element 1. So now we have glow alone without the solid text. And in my template, which was the original one coming from the edit page, I will do the opposite. I leave number 1 on and I will disable the glow number 2. And now all I need to do is merge them together. Output over output gives me a merge. And if I bring this into the viewer, it's the opposite. So foreground, background, switch, Control-T to switch foreground and background. And now I'm back to where I was. In Fusion, we have the checkerboard, long left click here, and we can turn it off. And we have again the same thing we have in the edit page, but now I've separated out my layers, but still everything is connected. So if I later change the text anywhere, it will not be a problem. Everything is still linked except where I separated it. But now this allows me to animate the glow separately. And one simple idea, let's add a fast noise, add a mask. A fast noise is a noise like this, which can be animated with the seed rate here. And if I bring this up, you see I'm having animated noise. I can increase the contrast a bit to make it even stronger, perhaps bring the scale a bit up or down, depending on the appearance of the animated glow that you want here. Going back to the edit page, I still have full control. I can change my text. I can also change my individual shading elements. Element 1 is the one that's active here on the edit page because this is linked to that template. But if I want to change the color of the glow, I can still do it from the edit page. All I need to do is temporarily enable it, which will kind of double the glow because now both the elements in Fusion are enabled. But I can enable it, change the color, disable it again, and now I have changed my glow element within this instance copy in Fusion, but I didn't even go to Fusion. I still have everything under control from the edit page. So you see a simple trick how I can separate out those layers and still have a lot of control from the edit page. Not everything. I don't have access to the fast noise, for example. If I want that, I would have to create a new template where specific controls are included. I have other YouTube tutorials on creating macros and templates, and you can check how that goes if you want to go that far, but for a simple adjustment, this will do. Quick look at these reflections here, same idea. I have element 1, which is the main element, and then the reflection is element number 2, which should be disabled. And if I enable it, I see what's happening. And you also see the animation, which is realized through the X offset. And I have similarly separated out the 2 shading layers in Fusions, but I have added this drip effect, which is adding this little like water ripple distortion kind of effect, just so subtle into the reflection. If those reflections here look slightly more elegant than the other titles in this timeline, one reason could be that I changed the font. And that's the next topic I want to talk about. Before I continue the tutorial, let me talk about the sponsor of this tutorial, which is MotionVFX. I am super happy to teach you everything I know about motion graphics and to create your own elements. And there is a time and place for this, but sometimes you're on the clock and then it's important to have access to high quality elements quickly. If you have a look at their website here under DaVinci Resolve, I find immediately lots of different packages for different themes. So if you are a travel photographer, your needs might be different than if you do wedding cinematography or if you are doing, like me, YouTube tutorials. And let's have a look at one of these packages. For example, let's say you want something cinematic. You need titles and credits for a feature film or short film, maybe some openers, etc. If I explore such a package, you immediately find a great trailer which showcases the elements. There are multiple tutorials for each package, how to use and customize and adjust the elements for your needs. And I just want to quickly go all the way down where you see how much is in there, because these are all the titles, lower thirds, etc. that you would find in this package. For example, this one here, it looks clean and simple, but it's not simple. There are different levels of motion for the two elements. There's a different fade in, slightly different from the fade out. There's some gradient happening. If I wanted to build this to the same level of quality, I would probably spend multiple hours of fine-tuning and adjusting motion, etc. And then I have one element, not all of these. So if you're working in commercial projects and you need access to some high quality assets, check out MotionVFX. And with this, let's go back to the tutorial. A quick win for any motion graphics project can be simply to choose the right font. And I'll give you a few ideas what I look for, how you can combine fonts, and then I will talk a little bit about some character level animations, positioning and styling options that we have, which brings us towards the modifiers. You have almost certainly seen this one here before from me and from others, because it's the default Open Sans. It's available on Linux, Windows and Mac, coming with DaVinci Resolve. So all the default titles basically use that, which is one of the Google fonts, which is also available on most systems. It's sometimes helpful to have a font that just works everywhere. I had one training course where I changed the default and then I got angry emails from people. Hey, your title is not working. I just reinstalled Resolve, but it's still not working. And yeah, well, sorry, I just used the font that you didn't have. So that's why I always use the default in training. Sorry about that. But in a real project, I wouldn't use it and I would start to play with other things. Now, when you open this list, it quickly gets confusing because you may have a lot. And if you just download some huge font package with 1000 fonts, then this list becomes unmanageable and you will never ever find what you need. So you might even consider throwing away some fonts if you have more than you can deal with. You don't need to use this list all the time, of course. So under Windows, if you just type fonts, font settings, here it is, you get the overview from the operating system, and some Mac user can tell us in the comments how you find something similar for Mac. Probably everyone knows how to find it, but I don't, since I don't have Mac. So you can use this for overview. Nonetheless, you probably don't need a million fonts. You probably need a few you're familiar with. And I prefer to have some fonts which give you multiple options. So the one I have here doesn't have a lot of options. It has basically 6 options here, 6 styles. That's how Resolve calls it here. Some people call the combination a font. So Calibri, Bold, some people call that a font, and the entire thing a font family, just for terminology. Doesn't really matter. So here you see there isn't much to choose from. But if I look at a different one here, Bahnschrift, for example, whether that's really a great font or not, I leave up to you. But you see I have lots of different options that decide within the same font or font family how bold it appears, how condensed or spread out the letters appear, how light or italic or whatever the different fonts offer. And if you have more options here, that allows you to combine the font in different ways within the same project. So here you have a line 1 and line 2, and line 2 uses light, line 1 uses bold condensed, and they look sufficiently different to offer contrast. It doesn't look like an accident, it looks intentional, but it's still one design project because I'm just using one font, which is a super simple design trick. There are also 2 different styles. So this one is bold and this one is regular, but they look so similar that it looks almost like an accident. Right? And that's what you probably want to avoid. Let's have a look how the professionals do that. So here, for example, we have something from MotionVFX coming up next week. They use Roboto, which is a Google font, which is also easily shareable, no license restrictions, etc., which can be helpful. But again, it's also so common that you might think about changing it. Lots of people use it in their web browsers, etc. So here I have changed it up a little bit, and I've also used two different fonts, and this time I used Mr. Eves and Mrs. Eves. These are two fonts that were designed by the same designer in order to complement each other in terms of one being a clean sans serif font and the other one having these serifs. So serifs are these additional things around the ends of the letters here, and this one doesn't have that, right? So those two fonts were designed to match, to work together. There are a few such pairs you can find, or you can use your own judgment to see what fits together, or you can Google for great font combinations, and you'll probably find 1,000 blog posts from graphic designers who have thought about it before. But just having a few such pairs, often one clean, one with serifs like sans and sans serifs, that's a good way to have contrast and to have something different but still matching in its style. Here's another example of the super typical serif sans serif combination. So what do I have here? Well, I like having like a handful or maybe a dozen of playful fonts for fancy projects or specific projects. So if you need to emulate some computer font, or if you need to emulate handwriting, or have some sci-fi project, it's sometimes nice to have something quick at your hand which doesn't look standard and might go in the direction you want to go. And almost certainly whatever you choose here will probably not be 100% what you want. But instead of installing millions of fonts and hoping that the right one is among them, I would rather use like a few fancy fonts, use one for preview purposes, and then for a specific project you might search for a specific font online that serves that specific project. Last font tip, having some icons available can be super helpful. So you have your wingdings and webdings on Windows and the equivalents on Mac, but sometimes it's helpful to install like 2-3 extra if you just simply need some arrows or a heart or whatever, or some social media icons. Instead of importing vector graphics and blah, 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 just having a font which quickly gives you those can be useful, which brings me to something like this, for example. If you want to do this, I can do this with a text plus effect with shading layers and one additional element, which in this case is character level styling, which brings me to modifiers, where I can show you how I get the arrow and all of this together into one element. Let's start here from scratch and just call it arrows. And now I do have a font named arrows, which I have here, and you see what's happening. So individual characters get replaced by arrows, and if I want to know which character is what, you have under Windows the character map from where I can choose and copy and paste. But in this case, I probably just want to use lowercase a, I know some of them because I've used them, and a B, which is the first two here, A and B. And well, I don't want to replace the entire text, right? So this would be rather stupid. So let me reset this to open sans, and now I will go into Fusion because what I'm doing next doesn't work in the edit page. So I do a right click here, character level styling, which allows me to select individual characters and change them. So let's select this one, and then I have to go over to the modifier after I've added the character level styling modifier. A modifier is a tool that sends back some form of data into another tool. So into this text field, this modifier sends back text with styling information, which will override the styling in the original tool. So that allows me in the modifier to make selections which you can't do in the regular text tool. But for those specific selections, you can change something. For example, change this to arrow. And I'll do the same for the last letter and get my arrows this way. Now next, I would probably want to reposition them and then animate them. I will show you how to do this within the modifier, but sometimes it's easier to do it outside. So first, let me show you the outside version, which for this example I feel is easier, and then I'll show you the inside version in a slightly different example. Now I will make a copy here, and this time I'm not bothering about instances and so on because I do want to save some time. I will just make a copy. Also, I don't really plan on making this reusable. Character level styling and reusable titles doesn't go very well because once you make these individual character selections, when a user later changes the text, it will probably no longer match the selection that you made for the character level styling. So you can kind of mess up the styling when you later start typing and changing the text. So this is more like a one-off thing to me. Here I will do the following. I will make this copy. I will use this copy for the arrows. So let's call this arrows. And how do I get rid of the text in the middle but keep the arrows in place? You see that there is also a character level styling modifier here. I will just select the word arrows here and I go into shading, and shading element number 1 disabled. So I'm just disabling the text for those characters, the shading for those characters. The arrows stay in place, the text just vanishes. And here in this template, I can do the opposite. I can do it for the arrows. So here I'll select the arrow, go to shading, element 1, disabled and disabled. And this way I have quickly separated one character level styling from the other one, and I can merge them together again. And now, because these are copies, I can do whatever animation I want to do. For example, I could use the tracking, and you see it is changing the position of the characters. I'm now working in the tools, not in the modifier. So it's actually working on the entire effect, including on the invisible letters. And I can use this, for example, for an intro animation. Let's give a keyframe here. And on frame 0, I just increase the tracking until it's outside. And this way the arrows fly in, and for the combined effect, that's exactly how it looks like. I can easily move them down a bit here. And let's say I also want them to rotate for whatever reason, then I can go into layout and can do this. And I don't need to access the modifier. I'm doing everything on the tool because it's faster. I don't need to select and so on. So I've saved a lot of time just by making this simple copy. And here I want to rotate around X. And you see that works also right away. Quick tip, equal sign for an expression, time to put the frame number in the rotation. Frame 39 is giving me rotation of 39 degrees. Just a quick mathematical way of animating. You can animate with keyframes as well, whatever you want. Times 4, bit of math, and we have this animation. Let's do a little bit more with character level styling, because I can show you how you can do animations within the character level styling, which is a little bit tricky, but sometimes it's exactly what you need. Let me bring out a text element and let's make this super creatively the custom title we usually have from the edit page, right? Now for this, I want to start character level styling. So right click, character level styling, go to the modifier, select the letter, and then increase the size. And I want to start to move things around. One way to move things around is using up here the manual positioning. That's very convenient. So you can position with this little dot underneath. This works even without the character level styling. It has nothing to do with character level styling. But this one here cannot be animated. So if you want to have a static positioning change or want to do some manual kerning where some letters should be closer, some further away, something like this, you can easily do this with this. However, here let me undo it because I want to animate it. So I will turn this off again here in the viewer, and instead I will select those letters, go into the transform and use the offset. That's a different feature, which is in this case coming from the character level styling, but it helps me in this case because these parameters can be animated, although it's not directly obvious how, because we don't have keyframe animation here. It does work slightly different, but let me set this up first. I want this effect. So I want this title like super small and aligned with the M. press Control drag for the finest control of numerical sliders or numerical parameters in Fusion. So this is the final effect that I want, or the final appearance that I want. Now, if you want to animate in character level styling modifiers, you can't just animate parameters. You have to animate the modifier overall. And under the text tab, you see here, right click for animate character level styling. And the way that works, let's say we want to animate over the first 30 frames, or let's say 50. I will just set a keyframe here. Let's go to the beginning, set another keyframe, and let me mark all the letters, selected characters. Let's clear the styling, which will clear it on this keyframe. So it's correct on frame 0, I have the starting point, and then on frame 50, I have what I want. What happens in between? Well, here's the problem. It doesn't animate the way you think it should. It just jumps. And this jump is a bit strange. It is coming from this animation. It's somehow not interpolating between the parameters. It will interpolate as soon as you kind of include in the keyframe the parameters that you have changed. And I don't know the exact technical reason for that. I just know the workaround how to get it fixed. So what I will do is on frame 0, I will touch all the parameters that should be animated over time. So I know that the size of the C will change, so I will just touch that size parameter and set it back to default. And that seems to tell the animation that this size parameter should be fully included and should by itself be animated over time. So if I now look at this, you see that the letter C is kind of doing what it should. The rest, there's still problems, right? So I will also go into the transform and do the same here with the X and Y and set it back to 0. And I'll also do it with the spacing. I'll do it on all letters, even though I only use this on certain letters, but that doesn't seem to be a problem. So now you see that my animation is running as expected. Now the word title, you see it's kind of overlapping. If you don't want this, set another keyframe, and you can just select something and set a keyframe by going where you want to change it and touch the parameter again and move the parameter a bit, for example like this, and this will set another keyframe. It will not be possible to make those keyframes like smooth and so on. You can't go into the spline editor. Well, you can, but there's really not much that you see. So all you see here is one path for all the styling information from everything. So there's unfortunately very little you can do. Well, you could make it smooth, but this is the path which contains everything and not just one parameter. So you have very little control over your individual animation elements. That's the problem. Nonetheless, for some simple things, this can work. And if you need more sophisticated controls, then you probably have to start to split out into individual tools and animate individually. You may be wondering here about this line-by-line animation for this list. If you want a bullet list, I'm doing this slightly differently. If I go to Fusion, I have two text elements. One has only the indicator, the arrow here, which happens to be the Q character in my arrows font that I have installed. The other one has the simple text, and then combine the two. And the question is, how do you get it animated line by line? Well, both of these have a modifier in there, and it's in both cases the suckless write-on modifier, which is not there by default, but you can get it for free from Fusion Reactor, which is a community supported plugin where you can install lots of things that people have built for the community. And this is one tool which allows you here to animate the appearance of lines, and this tool just feeds in the lines. So you have text with multiple lines, and depending on the line animation, it feeds those lines back into the text tool. And even in the tool, you see how the lines just come in here as text. So that's a separate modifier that you can install if you want to. And there are certainly more modifiers that can be useful. Next on my hit list would be the follower modifier. I'm covering it in my training courses. I can cover it on YouTube if you wish. Maybe in the future, let me know. Otherwise, I hope this tutorial already contained a lot that can be useful to you. Let me know what you need. Thanks again to MotionVFX for supporting this video, and thanks to you for watching, and see you next time. Cheers.